Hello and welcome to re:Invent. Today we are going to talk about embedding analytics into your application with Amazon QuickSight, AWS's cloud-native business intelligence service. My name is Joe Skanako and I'm Senior Manager Product Management for Amazon QuickSight. So in today's session, we are going to look at embedded analytics and why embed analytics at all, how Amazon QuickSight makes a difference, three key embedded analytics scenarios, and we'll then go through a demo looking at those, and then we'll look at some pricing options in Amazon QuickSight. So why embed analytics at all? Applications today generate a lot of data. This could be clickstream data about user behavior, transactions within the application itself, operational metrics, and more. Customers of these applications are often looking for insights from this data and to understand their own usage better. So whether this is an end user of a banking application wanting to understand their own monthly spend, or a fleet owner or a fleet supervisor in a trucking company wanting to aggregate and look at data from across all of their driver apps, or teachers, educators, administrators in a university or school wanting to understand student behavior better, especially as things switch to online learning. And so application owners are looking for ways to embed this data and provide these rich interactive analytics within their apps, within user workflows. And adding this insight and adding this information within a workflow has great benefits for developers, product managers, and independent software vendors who provide these products, starting with increased user engagement. So now the user or the administrator does not have to go to a third-party app to understand the analytics better. It also means that you're able to enrich the core application offering. So you're able to differentiate this application from everything else that there's out in the market. And finally, there's the notion of rich revenue streams that you can create from this data, because this was previously unavailable data, available now in a consumable, easy to use form. So the question then comes up, why QuickSight? Why use a BI service for this purpose? The most obvious solution here for an application builder seems to be to just build it out. But there are challenges with building out your own analytics solution. First of all, this can be expensive because you need to pull in a list of specialized resources, starting with software engineers, UX designers, and more. Now, these developers and engineers could come from your core pool of application developers, but that means that you are losing out on the core resources. It could also be that you hire additional resources, but of course, that then creates contention in terms of where you put your money. Then there's the question of time, because these resources do need to spend a whole bunch of time managing, building out the analytics experience. And these experiences are not just limited to simple graphs, as customers have come to expect sophisticated analytics from their tools as well as products. So this means that features like drill downs, filtering, and other functionality that are common in BI tools are often expected by customers, and it just takes time, and a project that ran in months now runs into years. And finally, there's the question of deploying this and taking it to market, at which point you often find that as you scale, as you grow from tens of users to hundreds to thousands to millions, there's the question of how do you scale, how do you manage the resources, and it becomes a resource-intensive resource management problem as well. That's where embedded out-of-the-box solutions come in. So these are available today from a number of vendors, but they end up having their own challenges. To start with, they are hard to scale. Most solutions out there come with a client-server model, which means that you have to manage these servers and scale as your populations grow, as I said, from thousands to tens of thousands to millions. Now, they often also mean that when you have server-based pricing, you scale in steps. So that means that even to start out, you have to commit to purchasing one of the servers, which means expense and an annual commit. And then as your load increases, as the number of users increases, you are adding more servers. And there's, of course, the question of advanced features. So you've bought in, you've deployed a solution, and something else comes out in the market, whether it's ML or other capabilities, and how do you get those in without constant evolution and advancement within the product itself? And that's where we believe that Amazon QuickSight as a cloud-native serverless solution really fits in. It provides seamless embedded analytics for your applications. It enables deeper data insights, whether you want that to be one-time analysis or data exploration by your power users, or in the form of automated insights that you deliver via machine learning. You also have the option, or rather the advantage, of scaling automatically with Amazon QuickSight because it's cloud native and fully managed. And you pay for what you use with QuickSight's unique session-based pricing, which we'll talk about shortly. And of course, you have the ecosystem of rich APIs and SDKs that you can use to integrate this with your application and software processes. Now, before we get deeper into some of those benefits, let's first understand the key differences between a serverless solution and one that's server-based. So to start with, let's look at a server-based BI architecture. Typically, what that means is that when you have more concurrent users, or when you have more complex dashboards, or you just end up having to deploy something to a different geographic location, you have to deploy more servers, you have to manage that infrastructure, and then it becomes a process by itself. There's also the question of high availability and how do you get that in, which often means that you have to architect high availability and then build that into the system, which means your true total cost of ownership for these situations is often the combination of the license, the infrastructure cost, and the management staff needed to run all of this. Now, that's where QuickSight's serverless session-based architecture comes in. So each end user or reader interaction in QuickSight is termed a session. And a session is a 30-minute interval from the point that a user first starts interacting with a QuickSight dashboard. So that means that as you have more complex interactions within a session, people use any number of dashboards, it all counts within that one session price. When you have more concurrent users, QuickSight and AWS's QuickSight backend just scales to make sure that as many users as you send to the system, we are able to treat them independently. So all of them get fast, consistent performance without having to scale servers on your end. It also means that when you have geographic distribution of users, let's say you have a new user coming up in London and you were based in the US, you just deploy a dashboard to London and you can then utilize resources there, paying only for the sessions instead of having to set up a whole different server there. You also have high availability that's natively built in, so there's nothing that you need to build or worry about. And so the true total cost of ownership comes down to the number of sessions you need. So that becomes like your all-in pricing for dashboard consumption. Now let's get into the aspects that we talked about. Seamless embedding means that QuickSight allows you to make your dashboards look and feel like your own. So you do that via themes, which allow you to match colors, spacing, backgrounds, and fonts to your application. You have an embedding SDK, a JavaScript SDK that's unique to QuickSight, which allows you to make sure that you can integrate your application with QuickSight, pass parameters in, change language, listen to what's going on within the embedded dashboard, and so on. And you've got single sign-on, which allows you to make sure that your users do not have to log in again. They log into your app or your website, and that's about it. You can then make sure that the right user gets the right dashboard in QuickSight. QuickSight also enables deeper data exploration. So what that means is you can provide the complete QuickSight experience of dashboard authoring to your power users. This often ends up being a key differentiator for your own application, and also unlocks monetization opportunities. In this model, you're also able to provide power users with the ability to share their own dashboards with their organizational users, which takes off a load from your side of wanting to create custom applications, custom dashboards every time a user or customer asks for it. And then you've got the advantage of benefiting from AWS's investments in machine learning. If you've been following QuickSight, you would have found that we've launched ML Insights, which provides advanced ML algorithms natively out of the box for things like anomaly detection, forecasting, and more. Or you could use Amazon SageMaker and bring in your own models and then integrate that into your QuickSight data. You also have the option of using natural language narratives, which are automatically generated by QuickSight and then can be fully customized to make sure that you're delivering business context and easy to read language to the end users. Now, we talked about serverless. That means that you scale with high performance. So serverless means that you get started without a server, whether you start with 10 users as a startup or then scale to tens of thousands or millions of users as you find success, or you hit the ground running with millions of users because that's where you want to start as an enterprise. QuickSight also offers Spice, which is an in-memory data store custom built for embedded and BI analytics. So that means that as you have high concurrency on dashboards, you do not have to worry about the backend or how it scales. QuickSight and Spice automatically take care of that for you. Now, on the architecture side, QuickSight also natively supports natively supports multi-tenancy, which means that you have the concept of namespaces with which you can isolate groups of users from each other. So if you as an organization have 100 customers, you can create 100 namespaces to isolate and provide capabilities to your end users and power users so that they can each see each other within an organization, but they don't see across organizations. This also comes with governance at the per user level in terms of what the users can see, what the users can access, but also in terms of what authoring capabilities you want to provide to these end users. Now, all of this is, of course, wrapped within APIs and SDKs that you can then use. So as you have all of the capabilities that we talked about, and as you roll that out to your end users, you have user and group management APIs, you have data management APIs, you have dashboard and template management, including cross-account access, as well as versioning within those APIs so that you can easily roll back, roll forward, and manage those deployments well. You also have permissions management, including managing IAM permissions for access to AWS resources. And all of this is available through a host of SDKs that are available from AWS. Now that we've talked about the key benefits, let's talk about 3 key embedded scenarios that we see customers ask for. The first is embedding without user provisioning. So these are scenarios where you have embedded analytics that need to go out to tens of thousands of users. They typically want to see the same data. A good example is when you want to show financial data within a company to the top executives, and it needs to be a quick, easy to access portal, but one that's restricted to your internal corporate website. It could also be a school wanting to show its spend data for the year to all of the stakeholders, whether it's the local county, whether it's the local population, and just wanting to put an interactive dashboard out there. Or it could be something that contains hour by hour updates to data, but still needs to be out there for tens of thousands of users to access. So there's a whole host of applications that websites that fall into this category. We've got a public gallery with some examples. You can check them out right there. The common pattern here is that you don't need per user segregation of data. Ideally, you don't want to manage the users, and so we've introduced this very recently, so you don't have to. So you can create a dashboard and embed it without having to provision users. Now, let's take a quick look at how this works. So you'll see that the end user accesses an application or a website, and that means a hit comes out to the application server, which receives a request from the end user. The application server then sends out a request to QuickSight requesting for a dashboard. It does not have to specify a user. You'll notice that I've mentioned user type as anonymous. That's what you'll pass in the API. And then QuickSight returns a signed URL that you can then embed in the application. This is a one-time URL, and that is then passed to the user on whose browser the dashboard then loads. So this allows you to request and scale these dashboards at a very high scale so that you can roll out whether it's to 10 users or tens of thousands without having to provision or manage servers. Now, when you get into apps and you want to show data to users, things change slightly because at this point you want users to see their own data. So there are many apps with many different levels of data security and permissions. So at QuickSight, we've introduced row level security and column level security so that you can set the right level of permissions for each user. This is also a model in which you typically have named users, and you can scale to tens of thousands of users. Again, the scale does not vary. It's just the question of whether you want to manage users or not. And in this case, there often are distinct end users, so you will create and manage those users. Now, if you look at the flow from what we discussed earlier, there's one key difference. The difference being that when the end user accesses a dashboard or requests a dashboard because they went to a certain page, the application server on the ISV or your own application server will then look for the user's identity. It'll then pass the identity to QuickSight, which will then return a dashboard after checking for whether the user has the right level of permissions, whether the user has access to the dashboard, and then sends the signed URL back so that the application can then embed it into the website or application. Now, in this case, we do support IAM federated users. We also support QuickSight native users that you can create and manage within QuickSight. The API is the same, but just the user type and what you're requesting for varies. And then you've got the third option right here, third scenario right here, which is embedding dashboard authoring in apps. So both the first scenario and the third scenario are new this year. And what embedded dashboard authoring allows you to do is to embed native data exploration and dashboard creation within applications. Essentially, you're able to embed the complete QuickSight experience, including data preparation and dashboard authoring, dashboard sharing into the application. You can curate what the user accesses by ensuring that only the right data sets with the right row or column level security permissions are provided to the user. And you can also customize the end user sharing and other capabilities. This means that the end user might not have access to data sources, for example. So you are only allowing them to access data sets that you have curated and put in front of them. They're maybe not able to set up email reports. So there's a whole host of management controls here that you can take advantage of and then apply it at a user level or a group level. Now, scaling to, again, thousands of customers or tens of thousands of customers, again, with tens of thousands of users each. So scale is something that you'll find fundamentally possible with QuickSight. And then you just have to pick the right use case that matches what you want to do and then deploy it. Now, this the flow of the calls for this particular scenario is also similar in that the power user of the application comes in, they request a page or click on a link that contains a link to embedded authoring. And in this case, the API is different. So you'll notice that it gets session embed URL, and you can still use IAM federated or QuickSight identity types. The application server requests for the embedded authoring session from QuickSight, which then returns the URL with the embedded authoring interface, and then that is then loaded on the end user's browser. So again, completely web-based. There is no download or anything else needed for the user to interact with that. Now, when I mentioned multi-tenancy earlier, I mentioned a concept called namespaces. So here you'll find that you are seeing namespaces in action with an ISV being able to roll out an embedded solution to multiple customers. You'll notice that authors and readers from each organization are put into a namespace. Within a namespace, those authors can explore and discover the authors or other authors from that same organization, but they do not see authors from customer 2 in this case. Dashboards and data sets can be managed via API so that they can be shared by the administrator of the entire account, in this case what we've termed the ISV dev team, either on a one-to-one basis with each namespace, or they can be shared across namespaces. All of this, of course, embedded within your application so that you can provide a holistic, easy-to-use experience to the end user. So now let's get into the demo. Let's take a look at these capabilities and understand how QuickSight allows you to embed and use these situations that we talked about. So let's start off with the developer portal that we have right here. This is a new portal that we've introduced. You'll find a link in the end of the presentation that you can use to get started. With this, you'll find instructions on how to embed, how to customize, and also samples that you can play with. So to start with, let's take a look at the embedding for all, or embedding without user scenario. So in this case, you do need to set up your QuickSight account, QuickSight Enterprise Edition account. And as an admin user, you have to allow the domain where you're going to embed QuickSight to be available within the list of allowed domains. So you'll find this in the Manage QuickSight section, which is available right here in this top corner. And you will see that the domain now needs to be added. For embedding without users, we also have a new pricing model, which is capacity pricing, and you have to make sure that you are on capacity pricing. Now, once you do that, you configure permissions of the web server or the application. And in this case, you have to make sure that those permissions are available within the application server that's making the call. You then have samples of the actual get dashboard embed URL API. Those are available within this portal. You can use those. I'm using the CLI right here to show you a sample call. Of course, for every dashboard that you are requesting, you do need to make this call again, which is why you would make it from an application server. In this case, you're seeing that we have the URL that was returned by QuickSight, and you can then go and use a web browser to test it out. Notice now that the dashboard that loads no longer has the QuickSight header. This is a completely standalone embeddable dashboard. And you'll find that all of the capabilities that you typically have in QuickSight, whether it's the filters, whether it's the interactive filtering, the on-sheet filters, drill downs, all of that comes with it. So whether you're embedding this for one or many, you have a lot of capabilities that you can put out there. Lastly, you've got the JavaScript snippet right here that allows you to use the JavaScript SDK and then specify this dashboard within your, embed this dashboard within your portal or application very easily. Let's also take a look at how you can customize the dashboard. So I mentioned earlier that we have a JavaScript SDK. You'll find that with the JavaScript SDK, you are able to listen to QuickSight events. So in this case, we're looking at the dashboard loading. You can also look at the parameters changing. So as end users or power users play with the QuickSight dashboard and change parameters within or change sheets within, you will be able to see those changes right in your JavaScript and then take actions accordingly. You also have a number of capabilities available here, ranging from adding a print button, changing languages, changing sheets, so that you could technically have multiple sheets that are accessible to the user. And instead of using QuickSight's native tabs, you can now use these controls to switch between. Or you could pass parameters in so that in case you wanted to have your own controls and applications, you can then create those on the application, as you can see here, and then pass the parameters in from your host application to the embedded dashboard. In this case, you can see that as I make a selection, that selection is reflected within the control inside the dashboard as well. Now let's switch to take a look at how you do this for embedding with users provisioned. You'll find that there are a few changes here in that you have the options for IAM or QuickSight users. And as you have each, you will pass the identity type along with the user type, along with the user ARN, which is the unique identifier. So the combination of those two allows QuickSight to make sure that QuickSight is getting the right dashboard, it checks for permissions of that user on the dashboard, and then enforces the right level of data. So dashboard loads otherwise are the same. So in this case, I have not set up row level security. So you're seeing the same dashboard load. Now, the last one we want to go through is the embedded authoring piece. You'll notice that in this case, the application server needs to have permissions to the get session embed URL. And once you have that, you do go and we've got the code snippet here so that you can go and try it out. But you request for the get session embed URL, and you also specify which page you want to start the author on. And you, of course, specify the user ARN, because in this case, the embedded author has to be unique. They need specific access to data. So you do want to make sure that it is available to the right user. Now, here you'll notice that you're able to log into QuickSight, take a look at the analysis, which previously was not possible in an embedded setting. You're able to interact with these, add filters, add visuals as normal. So in this case, I'm adding a new visual. You're seeing QuickSight's autograph capability in action here, as QuickSight pulls the right graph for the right dashboard, right data. You're also seeing we have the ML insights, the auto-generated natural language narratives, which you can fully customize and also add images, text, links, and so on. QuickSight also allows you to customize your themes, as we spoke about before. So here you'll see that I've switched to a dark theme. I can switch to a lighter theme without margins and gutters. So there's a lot that's possible. And you can also add filters, whether it's out of sight, or an on-sheet filter like you're seeing right here, where you're able to add something that the reader or the end user can easily interact with. All of this, of course, can be published out so that both the embedded author, the power user of your application, or the end users can access this. You've also got all of the other constructs like folders, favorites, and the datasets menu here to help you curate content that you want to send to the end user. Now let's move into pricing and take a look at some options there that we've recently introduced. So for Enterprise Edition authors, we've got a subscription-based model. It runs at $18 a month with an annual commitment, or if you want month-to-month without any commitment, that's also available at $24 a month. And as you look at readers, we've always had a named per user pricing model, which provides a max charge of $5, which provides predictable BI spend for organizations. And even for embedded use cases, if you believe that your end users will be using the product in a very, very active fashion, so many times a day, this provides great value. Now, in situations where you have dashboards being rolled out, especially without named users, or to named users, or to users at scale, we've introduced a new capacity-based pricing model. In this case, you don't have to name and manage users. You can simply get the dashboard and show it to whomsoever you want to. This starts off at $250 a month, which provides an easy way for you to get started, understand your usage, and see where you land in terms of the number of sessions you need, and then move on to an annual commitment model where we've got bundles of sessions that you can commit to for different amounts that you can see here. We also have an overage beyond that. So unlike a traditional server model where you would commit to a server and then you have to purchase a new server to scale yourself, in this case, QuickSight automatically scales with the overage prices that you see. In a nutshell, what this model allows you to do is to roll out QuickSight at scale to a very large number of users, but benefit from scale as you get lower prices. This applies to embedded use cases and also BI use cases at scale, especially when you roll BI out to tens of thousands of users and usage on a per user basis turns out to be only a handful of sessions. So with that, we've covered a whole lot of ground in this presentation. We've talked about embedded analytics. We've talked about why QuickSight, why the serverless nature of QuickSight makes it ideal, the capabilities in QuickSight ranging from theming, customizations, to the fundamental architectural capabilities of being serverless, providing multi-tenancy, and also being able to support high concurrency, whether in data access or in end user logins. So all of that's been what we talked about. So I want to leave you with this one slide, which talks about the key differentiators of QuickSight as a BI service, both for embedding and for end users of BI applications. So you've got scalable pricing, you've got usage-based, and it's cost-effective at any scale. QuickSight automatically scales and is serverless, so you don't have to do anything. We take care of the heavy lifting. It's deeply integrated with AWS services. It means that you have private VPC connectivity. You can natively manage connectivity to IAM, to serverless services like Athena. You can also ingest files directly from S3. There's there's a strong bunch of API and developer support in the form of SDKs that you can utilize to integrate this with your code processes. And you've got machine learning capabilities that we are constantly working on so that you can benefit from all of the advances that AWS has made in machine learning. Now, as continued items, I would recommend that you visit our second session on BI, which is going to dive a lot into the BI capabilities, specifically about the charting, the integrations to the AWS ecosystem, and so on. You should also stop by our session with Wire, one of our customers who's done some groundbreaking work during this pandemic, especially ramping up their ventilator production massively during this year. And you can learn about how they've used embedded dashboards to serve their entire organization and scale very quickly using QuickSight. I've also attached a blog post here that should be useful reading for anybody who's looking for multi-tenant embedded analytics. And finally, there's a link to our developer portal, which I hope you visit and benefit from the easy getting started and the material there to play with the embedded JavaScript SDK right there. So thank you. It's been an interesting reinvent with everybody being remote, but I hope this has been useful. And I look forward to working with you on your embedded analytics needs in the future. Stay tuned for more updates